so casuarina, the only thing that I know about casuarina is the way that they grow in Florida, which is a very tall, straight tree. Maybe your reference to casuarina is very similar. Maybe it's sort of a tall, upright tree. And so before starting the critique, because this tree has such a beautiful movement, age, quality to the design, this becomes a very significant piece to be able to dialogue and talk about. But I also wanted to know from Hugh, how does casuarina naturally grow if you see it in a natural environment where you see it reach any degree of age, as age would occur for casuarina as a species. And he showed me some images of casuarina where the branches were just these sort of contorted, looping branches that grew up and then dropped back down to the ground and then grew back up again. And it made a lot of sense. Obviously, it can happen when you start to see what is here and present with this tree. This is not a man-made shape in the trunk of the tree. But the other reason that I started to ask that question is, where do we go with the canopy from here? Because again, we're sort of touching on, you've got this beautiful tree, and the current iteration of the tree is a very high quality iteration. But we know, again, we can't hold this here. We know this is only going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And the trunk of this is very, very delicate. It's very, very slender. The attractiveness of the lines of this piece are the value of the piece. And so when we start to see this and we recognize that this canopy is only going to get bigger, we have to start having some sort of foresight. Where are we going to head with this tree? How are we going to handle this, knowing it's going to get bigger and knowing that we need to continue to advance and evolve the design? The handling of the current shape, the current iteration, this is stage one. You put that in motion, you mature and you develop the ramification, you try to get strength distribution. Hugh's working very hard on figuring out how to control ramification, backbutting, refinement of the shape, and you can see the fruits of that here in the presentation of this tree for this exhibition. But in another year, in another 2 years, this is going to be bigger, this is going to be quite massive, and this delicate trunk is going to be overwhelmed by that foliar mass, and we start to say, ooh, okay, I know that's coming, I know that I've got to continue to change that. What are some concepts that could potentially guide the decision-making process once we get to that point, right? And that's not to say, just because we know it's coming, we need to do it now, because all of this is going to continue to further drive the refinement of the pieces we're going to keep, but when we get there, we need to have a plan, okay? And so we can go back to some concepts of the slender model where we say, okay, space, visibility of the line, decreasing the width, decreasing the thickness of the pad, cool. I feel like we've already touched on that, we've got it, those can be concepts that guide. But then if we start to look at casuarina as a species, and we start to think about what else could be a design element that we play with in this tree, when we have this kind of slenderness in the design, and we have this kind of delicacy and beauty, one of the things that can impede the visibility of that is having that width on a tree where verticality is a big part of that. Now we touched on the tea tree that had verticality and then a lateral spread. This does have verticality and a little bit of a lateral spread, but in that lateral spread, we're running the risk of starting to impede the visibility of the elements of that line. And if that line is beautiful, much like we could see the lines on that, we want to be sure that we're able to continue appreciating these lines on this tree. And so we start to look at what would be the direction. Could we remove portions of this back piece so that we don't have such a massive sort of front to back presence? Would we ever think about further dropping this or further raising this so that we change its plane and use it as an ability to frame characteristics that are of value? Would we play on the length where maybe we remove this center branch so that we come out, we move back into the design, and then we engage again with the branch that's establishing the asymmetrical flow of the tree? These are the kinds of pieces of consideration that we're thinking about as we consider that continued evolution. Would we ever consider potentially removing the entire top of the tree and changing that position and showing that dropping and then that rising again with the impact or the design components we could apply to this? This would be the far degree of where I would say you potentially could consider going, but also maybe a better illustration of age and a better highlighting and visibility of the line that exists in the upper portion of this tree that creates a lot of the value. Could you guys imagine taking this off?
Yes.
You could? You could? But then if you take that off, what shape would this have to take to make that a move that had merit? Because it can't stay like this, right? We would have to now make this a lot more sort of compatible with the casuarina aesthetic. right? So all of a sudden it's like, okay, I can see taking that off. Yes, let's do that. You take that off, you say, okay, now what? And it's like, well, I didn't get that far. I saw that potential. Right, now this is also a really interesting tree because when you start to look at this tree, there are other positions in this tree that do offer opportunities for design. And I'm just gonna rotate towards one. And I'm not saying it's better, but I am gonna rotate towards one that does offer a lot of visibility of the angularity in the line. Potentially more visibility of angularity in the line, changes of direction and quality of movement, particularly where it highlights the sharpness of this bend and starts to give you a lot of options and freedom inside of the design. We see this piece of deadwood, we have a little bit of Navarian base here. We start to see some of this piece running up the backside, which gives us a significant discussion of age. There is something in this portion of the tree that might open up the door to a further enhancement of design. And this is always part of the evolution. When you look at the famous trees in Japan that have a history over the course of time in different hands, so many trees have been changed front to back to front to back to front. They've been harmony, they've been tension, they've been harmony, they've been tension. Every artist has changed their interpretation of it. I see this tree as a tree that has a lot of potential to evolve and probably has multiple iterations to what it will be over the course of time as Hugh continues to refine his aesthetic and his technique, but definitely a piece that should have a prominent place in the evolution of Casuarina as a species because it's spectacular. Okay? Any questions on this? I want to be respectful here, so let me go.